that it was in his interest to have 12 children because that was most efficient. He, like many people of his period, though he hated them very much, set about trying to rationalize the workplace. And in that process ended up sort of making these sort of strange and amazing systems for documenting what became the sort of, we later came to understand as sort of ergonomics, the movement of the human body through these sort of fine motor movements and these kinds of things. And making analog sculptures that trace, literally, in this very beautiful way, what it means to be human. But these are total subjugations of the human body to the workplace. Your gestures abstracted from your body, refined, and reimposed upon you. Again, without the use of information in this kind of sense. I'm going to have to skip this one. There are many other ways of sort of thinking about things and constructing these sort of slicings and layering. These are some beautiful diagrams that were done for an exhibition at the moment by Bernard Ludowski, showing a man's buttons, the buttons on a man who's properly attired, and the pockets on a man who's properly attired. Absolutely beautiful. There's nothing informational about them. You learn so very much, so very much about the flattening of the human body. And then, from an entirely different perspective, there's a very funny and interesting history of this sort of use of these sort of optical devices in order to sort of reconstruct the world. I think that that's what I was thinking of before I got lost, when I was looking back at this Norman Rockwell with the kid of the stereoscope. I can't get into either word of situationism. In general, you should reach for your revolver when people use that. When they start talking about situationism because there's a huge amount of nonsense. Fantastic stage photo of the terror that a crowd feels when they're presented with this kind of like strange and sort of optical, sort of world. As this sort of they see the media exploding into their own space, right, and sort of rushing onto them. But there are different ways in which these sort of media would explode into their space as well. That were very closely related to these sort of like theories of alternative cartography, theories of sort of like critiques of the workplace is and the sort of rationalization of space. And so, for example, here we have my hero, Sid Vicious, on the bottom right, and on the top right, the sort of classic trope of a sort of cowboy philosopher. This is from a brilliant essay by Greil Marcus called The Cowboy Philosopher, that appeared in 1986. And here, the most recent iteration of this kind of like 3Dification of the the enhancing of space with information. It's important to realize that this is not just emanating from the bowels of Google's genius, but there's an entire cultural history that's sort of looking at this sort of substitution of data or superimposition for data for the world. This goes until what time? This talk? Okay, I'll keep going. There's so many things that I wanted to show you here because I've been working on this project for about 3 years. So I'm just going to try to run through some of them. People who are not widely credited in this field. Otto Neurath, quite fantastic character, hailed from Red Vienna, this sort of brilliant moment when sort of like the high bourgeoisie of Vienna decided that they were going to go substantially communist, as opposed to, for example, fascist. He was Jewish, so he needed to get out of Vienna at a certain point and make a very hasty escape. You know his work. There's some aspects of his work that you don't know. Clive mentioned Spengler and the sort of beautiful, what was that figure that you used as the sort of the toppling of the tower and its transformation into the train? Yes. That Neurath was a kind of fellow traveler of a Marxist. He was a logical positivist and very much a kind of community activist. And one of his first works that he did, he wrote this while he was in prison, or started this book while he was in prison, serving for his participation in the Bavarian Soviet Republic that lasted approximately 29 days in Vienna. It's a great idea, not working out so well. Good book came out of it. You know him as the father of the Bathroom Man, Helvetica Man, right? But where Helvetica Man has now become this kind of hapless character who's a creature of his circumstances who forever is being sort of like, he has to go to the bathroom, he can't communicate, he doesn't have any language, he's always being hurt. He's become this sort of weird cartoon caricature of futurity. Neurath instead viewed him as the building block of a kind of like a progressive, productive, equitable, humane, fruitful society of fairness. And as a part of its development of a system called isotype, which was again intended to be a universal language, he set about doing things like this is a museum of society and economy in Vienna. It was established that he was intent on developing a visual vocabulary that could explain critical political economy to the semi-literate working classes of the world. Right? Like many of the people who developed data visualization techniques, he was a bit of a dreamer, and his tools, the things that he's developed, I think the only fair thing to say is that they've been appropriated by capital and now they're being used against you. So here you can see an example from his 1937 book, fantastically printed in 7 colors, which is very rare for that point, The Making of Modern Man, which is incredibly trenchant. And here you can see traces of some of his political leanings, statistics and class warfare, right? He's very sort of intent on this kind of stuff.
Professors have asked me, how many tens of thousands of symbols have you invented? I say, only 50, and they're only pictorial little pictures. And to this I add 30 international symbols, like the figures, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on.
I'm going to interrupt. This is his antithesis. Another Jew who had to flee Vienna, but instead of being political, kind of went off the deep end.
The mouth, the eye, the ear, the nose. Nose and mouth means taste. And the head for touch. This here is a symbol for action. A volcano cone up. And when I put the symbol for action on top of the mouse, it means to speak, to say, to see, to observe, to hear, to listen, to smell, and to touch.
I'm going to have to move it along. I'll make that available. That's from a film that was made in 1974 about this guy who was originally named Charles Blitz. Until he moved to England, it was informed very gently during World War II that having Blitz as the last name was maybe not the best idea, so he changed his name to Bliss. And it's a fantastic story in which he traveled all around the world trying to develop a universal language, but again, instead of engaging kind of like in a very intent, sort of like, you know, critical, in the form of critical political economy, got sucked into this sort of slightly mystical mode. Another pair, very significant in the field of data visualization, not at all widely credited, are Michael Kidron and Ron Siegel, who were committed Marxists of a very intense variety, very involved in the Socialist International. They developed a book, a series of books that was originally published by Pluto Press, starting I think in the late 70s in England, called the State of the World Atlas, which used a variety of different cartographic techniques to represent the world, to give you a better understanding of what it is. Rather than a single monocular standpoint, instead they acknowledged the failure of a single model, and instead presented these kinds of things that use some of the most beautiful design you will ever see in order to explain stuff in a very, very clear way. Really fantastic. You could run over to the Strand and the copies are a dime a dozen. These are very long quotations from this. Not only was there sort of the visual genius, and the name of the book itself was taken from a chapter from The Making of Modern Man by Otto Neurath. But what we see is some of the most sort of trenchant political writing you'll ever see. Very brief, very sharp, very clear about the state of the world. 31 years later, this was written, I think, for the 1981 edition. They're already warning that sort of transparency surrounding data and these kinds of things is being recognized by the powers that be, which then were sort of manipulating the data, hiding it, massaging it, doing whatever they could because they recognized what a threat it presented to them. You'll barely hear anyone say this now, and you guys knew this in 1981 well enough to write it down. I should end, right? Keep going. Okay. This is the end of this talk is getting to be a little bit difficult because what I'm trying to explain to you is that fundamentally the question that you need to ask is who is where and what are they, when they're looking at all these things from these supposedly abstract standpoints, where are they? Because you cannot, there is no place that is abstract in this world. You are at some point, somewhere embodied and rooted in an actual physical world. Walter Benjamin wrote a very famous piece based on this Paul Klee drawing, the angel of history. This is a fantastically overquoted quotation from Benjamin. Once you start to tune into it, you'll see that everyone always cites it. It's a very sort of moving passage about this figure who was both inside of history and outside of history, who was sort of trying to understand it. And one of the things that's remarkable about it is that you could practically translate this into a series of algorithms. of a figure who's both inside and outside of the space and struggling to make sense of it. It's facing backwards, as is almost everyone who is sort of like doing this kind of oscillating on this sort of vertical path, and is looking back and is trying to figure out, is it one thing or is it many things? Is there an integrity? Is it chaos? Does it make sense? And is unable to do so because he's caught in the very storm that driving, that sort of is driving all of these things, that is generated by them. And I think that that's probably it. I'm going to leave you with this last one, which I think is a fine example of a different kind of way of thinking about visualization. Some of you may or may not have seen it, I don't know. Housing crisis, understood from the embodied. I don't remember the name of the video game that was used to generate this, but someone took housing crisis and plugged in and turned this. One of the things that's so interesting about it is not just this sort of cinematic standpoint where you're like, whoa, you know, up and down and whatever, but a much subtler thing, which is that you can also see the future. Right? And this, for me, is really the essence of this, and that is that, you know, there was a tweet that went by recently from New Scientist, basically, you know, where some scientist was arguing that the past exists solely to allow us to understand what the future will be. That there is no material, or the past does not exist at all. But in this, you see something really remarkable, and that is you see a future that you both can and cannot understand. And you don't know how you relate to it until you get there. You know you're there, but it doesn't do you any good. And I think with that, I'll probably wrap it. And I'm sorry if I went over. And you can sit and watch this until 2008. Yeah, this is just a gift that doesn't stop giving.
This is what the early 2000s felt like.
And here we get to the very essence of this narrative. Right? Okay, thank you very much.